Marco, I think you might be muted, brother.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on three. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
Welcome back to another episode. Jesse, can you hear me?
I got you.
All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of the 49ers Red Zone podcast. I'm joined by my man, Jesse, from Last Second Sports. If you guys don't subscribe to him, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. First thing first, question right here. Rohan is actually setting up his room and everything in Wisconsin. He should be back real soon. But how you doing, my man?
I'm doing fantastic. Happy to be here. It's crazy because I feel like every time I come on your guys' channel, I'm only with one of you. I don't ever get to do it with both Rohan and Marco. It's just Rohan or just Marco. I feel a little slighted. I'm not going to lie.
Dude, I said the same thing the other day when he had you on. Like, it was like a last minute thing. He like, hey, I was like, dude, you should have told me. I would have set aside time and everything. But going into the 53-man roster, Jesse, obviously there were some pretty big surprises for some people. I don't want to talk about the big surprise, right? Obviously, the quarterback position. I kind of want to go into a little bit of the running backs first. What surprises you about the 49ers keeping 5 running backs?
I mean, that's a surprise in itself. Like 5 running backs. We kind of discussed it a little bit, but I don't think we ever took it serious. Like, oh, this is something that can really, really happen. It was something like, yeah, what if they keep 5 because they can't decide? I don't know if we ever came to the conclusion like this was a real possibility. Maybe you did. I didn't. And Sermon, to me, I just the biggest question that I had with the 49ers going into this cut down was how early is Shanahan willing to move off of higher draft picks? Because we've seen him drag his feet in the past with some of these players, and we got our answer. Not very early, because he kept Sermon and he kept Ambry Thomas, who both potentially should have been on the roster bubble. And so for me, I think keeping 5 running backs is a surprise. I think Sermon making it over Hasty is also a bit of a surprise, because Hasty is just a different player than Sermon, right? Like, he does at least something different that a lot of these other guys cannot do.
No, I absolutely agree with you. So it was actually funny because I was actually telling Rohan, and I think I was telling you and David in the group chat we have, I was like, I honestly think 5 receivers, 5 running backs might be something they will do. The reason why I thought that is you can't really cut Jordan Mason after he proved in camp and in preseason what he did. Like, he literally showed he is a legit NFL back. And then going to Hasty, when you're making stupid decisions on kickoff, you're stepping out of bounds before you even get the ball and everything, and you're literally pinning your team deep into their own territory, and that is the way you're probably going to make your biggest impact on the roster, special teams. And in the past game, I was like, okay, he's definitely getting cut. After week 1 of the preseason, I thought he was immediately getting cut. Going to Sermon, I get why they have him on the roster. So everyone talks about Sermon and being like this very negative aspect in terms of he doesn't look explosive. He doesn't look like the legit back that they drafted to be a 3rd-round back. But in training camp, like I was telling Rohan, the 2 days I was there at training camp, he looked a lot more explosive in camp than he ever had and I've ever seen him. So I think that ankle injury that he did suffer in Minnesota during the joint practices, I think that was a very big injury for him that showed his explosiveness. I want to ask you this question. Do you think this is a very big sign that the 49ers are going to be very, very, very run heavy with Trey Lance and allow him to actually get into the NFL system?
Yeah, you know what's interesting is I actually think that the fact that it sounds like they're going to bring back Croft and have 4 tight ends is a bigger sign of that. The 5 running backs to me is just, we can't keep running backs healthy. Like, that's what that's admitting. And we go through running backs like crazy. And also, I don't think this has been talked about, and I didn't even talk about this on my show. It kind of hit me a couple hours ago, and I'm surprised I didn't bring it up. But are they telling us that maybe Mitchell's not healthy and not going to play week 1. Like keeping 5, is that telling us that potentially that he's not going to suit week 1? He's not quite ready. I think they might be telling us that as well. We'll see. I haven't heard any news about him coming back to practice, but keeping 5, if you know your number 1 running back is out for a couple weeks, also makes a lot of sense.
So actually, I think Elijah Mitchell's fully healthy. That's one thing I have heard because I did ask around and I was like, hey,
that's good.
My biggest thing was Elijah Mitchell. I think the 49ers roster without Elijah Mitchell, it kind of puts you in a bind because who do you start? Do you start Jeff Wilson Jr.? Do you start Trey Sermon? Like, what do you do? Like, because they have had rumors about Trey Sermon being potentially the number 2 back as well as Jeff Wilson. And I think when you have those 2 guys on the roster, it's a battle for running back 2. I don't think Jeff Wilson Jr. is that much better than Trey Sermon when Trey Sermon is fully healthy. So I was really wanting to see Elijah Mitchell in this offense. But going a little more to the tight ends, because that was, to me, the biggest surprise was them bringing back Tyler Kroft to have 4 tight ends on the roster. Why would you want to bring back 4 tight ends when Tyler Kroft doesn't move the needle in any aspect, not in the run game, not in the pass game?
I agree with you, but oddly enough, I think he's also a better pass catcher than he is a run blocker. Like if I have to choose what he is, I'd say he's more of a receiving tight end. So how many 2 tight end sets do they plan on running? Right? Like that's an interesting one. You've got 3 pass catching tight ends essentially. Now 2 can block for sure, right? Like obviously Kittle can do both at a very high level, but man, 3 of them are pass catchers. Like that's interesting because I just said that them having 4 tight ends tells me they're going to run the ball all the time. But when 2 of them that you've kept in Dwelly and Kroft are primarily pass catchers, is that what it's telling us? I don't know. This one's an interesting one to me. This is a head scratcher, and there's a lot of really good players. We're going to go through it all, but a lot of really good players that are not on this roster that I really would prefer to keep other than a 4th tight end. But that's just me.
I absolutely agree. So one thing I did love about Trey Lance at NDSU was the fact that he loves throwing to his tight ends, right? So then bringing back Tyler Kroft, Ross Dwelly, 2 tight ends that could be decent in the run game but are better receivers with George Kittle just shows that Kyle Shanahan not only is he going to throw the ball with 2 tight end sets, or not necessarily is he going to run the ball with 2 tight end sets, he's going to throw the ball with 2 tight end sets. He's going to allow Trey Lance to throw to his favorite targets, which is actually a receiver. When you watch him at NDSU, he loves to go to his tight end first, even if that's not the first read. That was his kind of style of play. And I think that's going to allow him to be more comfortable in Kyle Shanahan's offense because it's not the typical Kyle Shanahan offense we've seen in a while, right? This is literally going back the Washington Redskins RG3 style of offense, and it's going to be a little bit different. I did hear you say on your episode a couple minutes ago, they're going to stretch the field sideways, and that is exactly what Kyle Shanahan wants to do because what that does is it puts stress on the defense in so many different ways. It kind of like what the Ravens do in Baltimore. They put so much stress on the defense with all 11 players. So do you think what Kyle Shanahan is doing is going more towards a run-heavy, dink and dunk kind of offense?
Man, it's interesting because I almost feel like the roster makeup now would almost suit Jimmy Garoppolo better, right? Like a lot of short passes, intermediate, over the middle. But I really do think that it can work both ways here. Like I genuinely think that the guys that they're choosing, first of all, gives you the power run game option. It gives you the zone run game option. It gives you the option to run out of many different sets and formations, but also, again, stretch the field horizontally, which, when people look at strong arm quarterbacks, they always go to the same thing. Well, this quarterback has a decent arm. He can throw the ball deep. Like that's what everybody always says. Well, Jimmy can throw the ball 50, 60 yards. He's got a strong arm. No. When I talk about arm strength, I talk about power throws from far hash to sideline outside the numbers 10, 15 yards deep. That's a throw that Trey Lance can make that Jimmy Garoppolo can't consistently. And so when you do that and you've got all these guys that can help you stretch the field horizontally, that's where I think this starts to show up. And imagine getting a brigade in front of Deebo Samuel with Kittle and a second tight end with Juszczyk as the guys that are out in front, and possibly Trent Williams being a puller as well. Like, you're not getting to the wide receiver in that scenario. So to me, like, this is what it looks like. Also, interestingly enough, keeping 5 wide receivers, I think this is another telling thing. Jennings was a big part of this offense on third down last year. They really trusted him. He's had an interesting offseason, to say the least. I think this gives them the insurance that if either Jennings gets hurt or doesn't play up to his potential that they're hoping for, that they have another big body guy that they can go to on third down outside of Kittle.
I absolutely agree with everything you just said right now. So keeping that 4th tight end, it also puts in the factor, right? You have a right tackle who we don't know who was going to be. Is it going to be Colton McKivitz, Mike McGlinchey? We don't know who right tackle is going to be. And instead of having George Kittle, one of your best playmakers, stay in and be an in blocker, potentially a right tackle, essentially, you could have Tyler Kroft stay in and help on the offensive line while you're having George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and Brandon Ayuk run routes. So I think that could also be a big factor in Kyle Shanahan's decision-making in terms of, hey, I don't have a right tackle. At least Tyler Kroft gives me the illusion that I'm going to run the ball or I'm going to pass the ball. They don't know what I'm going to do when he's on the field, essentially, because he could do both pretty decently. So I think that's what's going to end up being. I think it's going to be the 4th tight end is going to be an additional blocking specialist that George Kittle used to be in this offense. And I'm finally happy to see George Kittle being a actual receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a big thing. They have to figure out how to get him to get out on routes on a regular basis. They just do, right? And then the other thing is this. Kittle misses games. And when he does miss games, they still have multiple options that can catch passes in Kroft and Dwelly. So you can still go 2 tight end and send them both out on routes. You still have somebody that can be a great blocker, right? And so they just have all options available to them. I mean, to me, it seems like the tight end in one way or another are going to be a big part of this offense. And if you lose Kittle, it makes it hard to do that. But by bringing back Kroft, it allows you to do at least some of the same things that you want to do with Kittle, whether he's there or not. So I think that's what they're looking at.
Salty, yes. My boy Rohan does look different today. I'm here with a special guest,
younger,
Jesse.
I know.
I'm here with my special guest, Jesse, one of my good dudes. So Rohan is actually finally moving into his college dorm and everything. So I'm holding it down for Rohan on his channel as well, like he normally does for me. So I'm doing that as well. So make sure you guys hit that subscribe button on both channels, the 49ers Red Zone Podcast, Last Second Sports, and also you guys are probably already subscribed, but to Rohan's channel. Going over to the receiver room, I wasn't shocked that they kept 5 receivers because I really didn't see a 6th receiver stand out throughout camp and preseason. That's like, okay, this dude has to make the roster. If we look at Malik Turner was the 6th guy potentially to make the roster. But realistically, the only really value he brought was on special teams. And the 49ers literally just signed Ray McLeod, Oren Burks, George Odom for those special team roles. So there's no responsibility for a guy like Malik Turner, who probably would be inactive every game day. Does that shock you? The 49ers cut Malik Turner and valued more so actually the receiver room than anything rather than special teams.
It doesn't shock me. I thought he had done enough to make the team. I mean, on a team full of standouts on special teams that they brought in, you talked about some really good special teams guys that they brought in. I thought he was the elite of the elite. I mean, he caused a fumble during preseason. He was always right there. I mean, always right there to make a tackle or a play on special teams. Like, he was, in my opinion, showed to be the best special teamer that we had, right? And, you know, obviously he wasn't going to return kicks or anything like that, but I thought he really stood out on special teams. And so I'm not shocked, but I am a little bit surprised. I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't a little surprised, but I also didn't think that they would keep 5 running backs and 6 linebackers and 4 tight ends. Like there's just a lot of weird things that they did, and you and I were having a lot of talks offline yesterday trying to figure out what they were going to do. And there were some things that you got right or I got right or whatever, but I think the overall roster construction, as far as how many players kept at some of these positions, we were off on, right? Like we
Oh
were
yeah,
just flat out wrong
absolutely.
on. So
It was funny because like my initial 53, so like the initial 53 I sent you, David, and Rohan actually had 5 receivers and 5 running backs. And then at the end, I
right,
was like, you know what? It doesn't make sense. Like, at the end, I was like, it doesn't make sense roster construction wise. I've never seen a team carry essentially a 6 running backs because you have a fullback in Kyle Juszczyk. So 6
right,
running backs, 5 receivers. It's like didn't make sense. I was like, okay, they have to only keep 4 of the backs. Makes sense to keep 4 of them, not 5. And then you're only going to keep 5 receivers. Like it doesn't make sense because of the health of some of these guys, like Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Danny Gray could potentially go down at any moment because from what I've seen from him, he's a smaller dude, and if he gets over the middle, gets hit by a safety or a linebacker pretty hard, I think he might go down with a rib injury or something like that. Just that's what I've seen from him. On one of the hits, I saw him go flying, and he's a small dude, so
yeah,
that's where you got to have there. So that's something that did surprise me. Not too shocked that they kept 5, knowing how Kyle Shanahan likes to think sometimes. Going over to the offensive line, I know some of them might have surprised you a cut or two. I know a lot of people were in the chat are like already arguing that Jason Poe should have made the roster. Do you think Jason Poe 100% should have made the roster, and that is a surprise cut?
we talked about him a lot yesterday as well, and I think we had him on the bubble. I do believe that ultimately he should have made the roster, but it's funny because I think that the perception was that he was a lock and that Moore would be the bubble guy. And I think both you and I disagreed with that heavily. I think we both locked in Moore as being on this roster. And when I put out my 53, Poe was one of the guys that I wasn't positive about making this team. Now, in saying that Moore was a lock to make this team, um, Zakel was not, in my opinion. That's where I was like, okay, he probably doesn't make it and Poe does. So that was the surprise when it came to the offensive line for me, is that Zakel made it and Poe didn't. That was a bit of a surprise for me.
So I was surprised that Jason Poe didn't make it, only because how do you randomly go from getting reps with the ones to being cut? Like as an undrafted free agent, and Nick Zakel was over there at the beginning of the camp. Was struggling until he got moved to center, and then he started actually doing a little bit better. So to me, I think at the end of the day, that roster politics went into play, right? Where we drafted this dude, we are not going to waste draft capital by him potentially getting claimed by another team. And he got a Senior Bowl invite, so there are some teams who already had that connection with him because from the Senior Bowl. So that kind of confused me. But at the same time, it doesn't, because the way they spoke about Nick Zakel, they spoke about him. They had high scouts saying that they loved him as the center at the Senior Bowl when he started getting reps there. He could play guard. I don't think Jason Poe could play center, to be honest with you. I think he's a little too small to play center. And I also think he's a little too small to play guard in the NFL. There's some plays where he's going to get manned up one-on-one with guys like Aaron Donald. Do I think he can hold up with Aaron Donald? Maybe. But the thing is the size, the weight. Aaron Donald would, I'm going to be honest, Aaron Donald would toss him like a rag doll. That's how small he was. I hope he comes back on the practice squad. I thought he's a hell of a player. But he's one of those guys who is overachieving for what he is. And that's a hell of a player to do so. I don't know if you agree with me on Jason Poe and Nick Zakel stuff, but does it worry you that the 49ers don't have a legit right tackle to back Mike McGlinchey up? Because if we look at it, it's probably going to be Colton McKivitz or Jalen Moore playing right tackle if Mike can't go.
I'm done with the Moore at tackle. Like that's where I have the issue. If he was kept because he can play both tackle and guard, I'm done with him at tackle. Like, he's proven he cannot play tackle in this league. I do think he can be a pretty good guard, right? And that's why I think when it came down to him and Poe, probably the versatility of Moore made sure that he was on this roster. But really, I think that long term he can be a better guard than Poe can be, and I think that was the reason they should have kept him. Man, I think that's a project I'm done with. Do not play that man at tackle. And yeah, that's a concern. I mean, what are they going to do? Are they going to ask a rookie who's been playing good in Burford at right guard to slide over if things get crazy and then move in Moore to play guard? Is that what they do? I just right now, in my opinion, they should go make a trade. There are multiple guys. I know that you threw out Dillard. I think that's a great option. I think Wynn with the Patriots, either one of those guys, go get one of these guys. Like, now you have the roster money to make this happen. You have the flexibility. This is not the time to sit on your hands. This is the time to go, okay, McGlinchey may be hurt long term. He may never be the same. We're going to make sure that our franchise is protected. We're going to go get ourselves a right tackle that we can trust in case this does not go well. That's what I would do.
I absolutely 100% agree with you. I've said since Jalen Moore was drafted, since I saw Jalen Moore at the Senior Bowl, he is 100% a guard, not a tackle. I argued with many people on the timeline, some 49er content creators that a lot of people highly respect, that I also respect, that he is a right guard, a left guard, whatever you want to put him at guard. You could potentially put him at center with the athleticism he has. I had never seen him at tackle. I thought it was ridiculous to play him at tackle. You're putting a guy in there to fail. And when you put a guy in there to fail, all it does is make fans say, this dude is a bust. He sucks. Why is he on the field? Obviously, if I'm a guard and you're putting me at tackle, I'm going to suck. It's like putting a wide receiver to play quarterback. They're going to suck. Like, there's no point to do stuff like that. Like, it's like putting Jerick McKinnon to play quarterback. Yeah, he played quarterback, but he's a running back now. Like, that's stuff that you don't do. Now, we talked a little about the offensive line. We know that it's probably going to be a big issue. I don't want to get to quarterback just yet. I want to talk about the defense a little bit more before we get to that, just because that's the biggest juice of the conversation, right? Defensive line. Kimoko Turay actually makes it over Jordan Willis after people were placed on the IR. Is that the right move, Jesse, knowing that the 49ers have no issue with cap?
Man, I was surprised that Turay did not make this team. Like, that to me on the defensive line, I locked him in for sure that Turay was going to make this team. I was looking, I came down, I said, okay, to me it's between Hyder and Willis. Which one of them doesn't make this roster? I thought Turay was a lock. But then as I look at it and I really start to remember how the preseason played out, he was constantly running with like the third defensive line over and over and over. And so it kind of started to make sense that, oh, you know what? He didn't make this team. They weren't as high on him, maybe as some other people were. He certainly has the athletic profile, but Willis, at the very least, you can count on him to be a special teams ace, right? Like, we saw him single-handedly win us a divisional playoff game. The only reason Jimmy Ward got a blocked field goal was because of him. They had the block punt. That was him. So you can count on that. And then Hyder just works really, really well with Chris Kocurek. He did it with Detroit. He did it with San Francisco. There's a connection there. And you can kind of move him up and down the line. I think you can move him inside more than you could Turay. So I think that's ultimately what it came down to. But I really... that was a surprise to me. I thought Turay, with that $1 million guarantee that I believe he had, I thought he was a lock to make this team, but he wasn't.
And that's the funny part, too, because I obviously thought he was an absolute lock to make the roster, even though he was playing deep into the fourth quarter and stuff like that. I thought he was more so doing the 49ers a favor. When we look at it, they were kind of short on the D-line, right? You don't have a Reek Armstead, so that kind of like throws off your D-line rotation. They didn't have Hassan Ridgeway, so that's another guy who potentially is a backup that you're not having. So you're going to have to choose one of the guys that plays a little deeper into the rotation. But coming off the edge, I would take Kamoko Toure over right now. I would take him over Kerry Hyder. I would probably take him a little bit over in terms of like legit pass rush, not necessarily bull rush and effort. I would probably take him a little bit over Charles Omenihu in terms of pass rushing, because when you look at Charles Omenihu, he is a guy who can get to the quarterback in multiple different ways. He can get it inside. I think he's a better inside rusher. I think Kamoko Toure actually complements guys like Nick Bosa and Samson Ebukam on the opposite side, because he's that speed guy. He's that element that the 49ers really don't have outside of Drake Jackson now. And I think when you put someone with speed opposite of Nick Bosa, Samson Ebukam, it allows the whole defense to go crazy. So to me, that was the biggest surprise on the defensive side of the ball in terms of what they need opposite of Nick Bosa. I get it. Samson Ebukam is also that athletic freak who is super athletic that could get to the quarterback opposite Nick Bosa. But I think the key to that defense, in a way, was actually Kamoko Toure. And they decided to keep Jordan Willis. Makes sense. Special team value, versatility, allows him to go inside out, Kerry Hyder inside and out as well. That, to me, that move, that didn't make sense. Now, going to the linebackers, this was funny because you and I were having this conversation. You kept saying the 49ers are going to keep 6 linebackers. They're going to keep 6 linebackers. And I'm like, no, there's no way. Every year they've kept 5. And then this year they keep Curtis Robinson only to put him on the IR and bring back an extra D lineman. So you were absolutely right. They did keep 6 linebackers. But Curtis Robinson's going to head to the IR. They will have 5 on the roster week 1, and they're going to bring either that spot's either for Jordan Willis or for Tyler Kropp. Doesn't matter who. But what do you think of the 6 linebackers initially, and what's the reason for Curtis Robinson to be on the initial roster?
Like, to me, they just had an agenda that they wanted to keep 6, right? And then Robinson was like, okay, it's a loophole, right? Anytime you can throw somebody on IR, it's a complete loophole. And so it's like, okay, I want to get more looks at him, or maybe sneak him onto the practice squad after he's healthy type thing. So that's where that comes into play. But man, I'm disappointed that McCrary Ball is not on this team. I really am. Listen, I think it's logical to assume that Flanagan Fowles would make this team. But if I had my choice, I would have taken a shot on McCrary Ball. I really loved what I saw from him. And I know it was just the preseason. Maybe I'm a little higher on him than I should be. But especially that game against the Colts, I was just so impressed with him. I felt like every single play he was right by the ball. Like, he was just there making plays every single play, down in and down out. I couldn't take my eyes off of him when he was on the field. He was just a difference maker, I thought. And so, to me, to lose out on that, hopefully they're looking at him maybe as a practice squad addition if another team doesn't pick him up. Man, that to me was not a surprise. I'm not going to sell it as a surprise, but like as a personal favorite, that one was like, man, if that was me running that team, I'm keeping him on this roster. I would love to have McCrary Ball as part of this roster.
So, like I told Rohan, I thought McCrary Ball looked pretty damn good in training camp. I think he flew around. Guys who are around the ball often are pretty damn good football players. I don't care what anyone says. When you're around the ball and you're creating turnovers, you're doing stuff like that, you are a pretty good damn football player. Now, with McCrary Ball, and I kept telling Rohan, the biggest knock on McCrary Ball is his size and length. That's something the 49ers value at the linebacker position. If we look at every single one of their linebackers, they are lengthy. They are pretty big in size outside of Dre Greenlaw, but he's still long. Like, he is a lengthy guy. Pause. But when you when you look at the linebacking group, Curtis Robinson fits the mold of what the 49ers look for in a linebacker, a guy who's 6'3". Pretty much, if you look at the ideal size, it's a Fred Warner style of linebacker. He has the same size. Now, the only thing that I told Rohan that Curtis Robinson lacks in terms of NFL is his recognition of plays, right? His play recognition is what I kept noticing that he lacks on that McCrary Ball had. And you can't really teach that much. Like, you have to just be able to play through it, right? And when I'm talking about Curtis Robinson, his college tape, he did just that. He reacted to plays the right way. He got to the ball. But then when you get to the NFL, game's a little bit faster. He might need to let the speed slow down for him. I don't know what it is, but linebacking group, 49ers have the best linebacking group in the NFL. Now, let's go to DBs, right? So
let me say
49ers
this.
cut.
Can I just say this just real quick? I completely agree with you. They have a type, right? And all teams have a type at all positions, like guys that they just love. They fit this athletic profile. But sometimes you have to throw all that out the window. And I think a great example of that is there's a reason Akello Witherspoon is not on this team anymore. And there's a reason that Jason Verrett still is, regardless of what they've gone through. Akello 100% fits the athletic profile that the 49ers look at when it comes to an outside corner. Jason Verrett is the polar opposite of that.
But I think too, though,
they trust him because he's a playmaker.
But I think too, though, Jesse, and so you're the Akello Witherspoon and then the Jason Verrett thing. I agree with you that 100%. Akello Witherspoon fit what they're looking for ideally in a quarterback, a corner, 6'3", long, athletic. But now they went away from that cover 3 system and they're playing that press man. So I knew that was going to happen under DeMeco Ryans and not necessarily under Robert Saleh, because DeMeco Ryans is an aggressive player and he always talked about loving the ability to do more with your defense. So I think them going away from Akello was more so them going away from him only because of the schematic difference, right? Like they're doing that press man cover 1 stuff rather than the cover 3 when they had Richard Sherman. And all you can really do when Richard Sherman's out there, to be respectful, is run cover 3, like at that age. So I think that's kind of why they went away, because they also did bring in E-Man, right? They brought in Emmanuel Mosley, who isn't that big, but he could play that press man. He could play in that cover 3 zone. So I think they do have a type, but I think they are willing to go away from that type of player when the right guy presents himself. I think just the only thing for Mercury Ball was the size. I think the player is there. I won't be shocked if he's on the practice squad and next year he's on their 53-man roster when a guy like Dre Greenlaw, DFF, and potentially Aziz aren't on the roster. So I won't be shocked when he is on the roster next year, to be honest with you, because he does remind me a little bit of Dre Greenlaw and Aziz put together in a way. So I do agree with you in terms of they have a type and they should start going away from the type and pick the best player possible, right?
Yeah. And a lot of times you're going to be able to get both, right? But sometimes you can't. Like sometimes you see a player and you're like, I don't think their type, it's safety, it all would be a Hufanga type. Like I don't think you want an undersized slow safety, right?
No, absolutely.
But he makes plays and he's kind of earned his spot to be a starter on this team. And so all of a sudden you're looking at it going, okay, well, he certainly isn't our type, but at some point he's just too good to keep off the field. And I hope you're right. I hope that he clears waivers. I hope that they're looking at bringing him back, because I think it would be a shame. I think he's a really, really good football player and has an opportunity to be a difference maker for this defense in the future. And so I hope that they give him a second chance if he does clear waivers.
So right before we get to the quarterbacks, Jesse, because I know that's what everyone's waiting for. Everyone's waiting for us to talk about the quarterbacks, right? But defensive backs, I'm going to put them all together, cornerbacks and safeties. They cut 2 players that I thought, actually 1 player I thought should make the team, Tariq Castro Fields. They cut him. I thought he did a hell of a job in terms of putting himself in a conversation with the cornerback 2s during training camp. He started playing, he's out snapping Ambry Thomas in camp, started out snapping him during preseason. They cut him. Safety-wise, they cut Dante Johnson, Tashawn Gibson, and Taylor Hawkins. There's no word whether Dante Johnson will be back. People are saying, oh, we're guessing he will. He does every year. But that's not legit that what's going to happen. So the 49ers are going to be in a situation where they need to sign a 4th safety. Do they feel comfortable with one of their other players playing safety or something? Because there's no signs of Dante Johnson coming back, because only 2 guys are going to the IR, as far as we know. What do you think about the defensive back room?
It is interesting. Like right now, it seems like they're okay going with 3 safeties. I've got to imagine that the decision comes down to either Dante Johnson coming in and being a safety or Jaquiski Tartt. Like I think that the door is open for him to return. He had some cryptic tweets that were out there. I would say the other thing too about the defensive backs, I was surprised they only kept 5 corners, right? Like I thought that Johnson would probably make this team and Castro Fields would make this team, and that they would cut more and try to sneak him back onto this roster later on. Like that was where my mindset was. Then it became, okay, well, Tart was all of a sudden cut. So maybe that's who they would go after. They would skip bringing back more. I never thought in 1,000 years that they would cut both Castro Fields and Johnson. I didn't think that was at all possible. So the whole secondary surprised the hell out of me as far as what they decided to do, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I was so shocked that they cut to 3 Castro Fields because you started getting, once Emmanuel Mosley and Travarius Ward went down, everyone was expecting it to be Phenomenal Lenore and Avery Thomas running with the 2s, or with the new 1s, essentially. And it was actually Tariq Castro Fields, Kadar Holman, and Demo, right? Like, it was 2 guys that got cut. And it kind of makes me laugh because if we look at Jason Poe, we look at Kadar Holman, we look at Tariq Castro Fields, they're out repping the guys that are behind them, yet they're the ones getting cut. And I think this could be a way for the 49ers to do their roster construction in terms of, hey, yeah, we gave those guys a shot. We cut them. Teams aren't going to really like him because of what we did. Now they come back to our practice squad. We stash them away for a year where they could develop. They get better versus like guys like Avery Thomas already has game experience where we don't have to rely on him to get the game reps as he's going, right? So that's something I'm kind of thinking of, like, why would they cut Tariq Castro Fields when he was out repping Ambry? Why are they only keeping essentially three safeties? Because Jimmy Ward's not going to be active for the first 4. That's confusing. You did throw Jaquaski Tart out there. We don't mention his name on this podcast, man. You should know that. Everyone on here knows that that's a name that does not get thrown around. But I'm gonna throw out if we want a safety, we could bring Anthony Harris to this roster. All right, like I would not bring Jaquaski Tart to this roster. I would rather bring Anthony Harris to this roster, who could actually play free safety. He could play strong safety. He could do a lot more than what Jaquaski Tart does. No offense to Jaquaski Tart. I think he's a good player, but he does not need to come back to the 49ers. I do not think it's a smart idea to bring everyone back, to run it back for the 10th time in a row when those players cannot get it done. When you cannot have a game-changing interception that hits you in the chest, I don't think you should deserve to be back. That's just me. Others think I'm harsh on it. I think Anthony Harris should be back on this. Should not be back, but I think the 49ers should call Anthony Harris to come to this roster and play safety for them. That's what the 49ers should do. Not Jaquaski Tart. I get Jaquaski knows the system. A lot of people keep saying that, but let's be realistic. Jaquaski is not the player that Anthony Harris is. I don't know if you agree with that, but 1, it looked like you did by your reaction.
Harris is the one guy, like we were talking before, you're like, is there anybody that you would want to bring in? And we didn't give each other that answer, but to me, Harris is that player. 100%.
Oh, yeah,
this guy
that question was going to come.
Yeah, this guy just 2 years ago was a stud for the Vikings, right? Was very coveted. Nothing against Tart, right? Like if he's an option, I would probably prefer him over guys like Moore for a couple weeks if that's what it takes, and then cut him again when Ward comes back. But Tart's just not as good as what people want to think that he is, right? Like let's call a spade a spade. This guy was the 99th highest paid safety in the NFL when it came to annual money, and he still couldn't make another NFL roster, right? Like, I appreciate
to
everything
the point
you did for the 49ers. Real quick, I don't put like that interception. I think is overblown a little bit. Certainly, I would love for him to make that play, but he's just not a ball hawk. And we can talk about how that's luck all day long, but at the end of the day, there are players that are consistently throughout their career around the football, and he's just not one of those players.
And so I wouldn't say it's luck, right? Because I'm a firm believer if you've played ball, good football players, good ball players are always around the damn ball, no matter what. Like, good ball players are always around the ball. And when you're always around the ball, guess what's going to happen? The ball's going to find you. It's just natural. That's why we see guys getting a lot of interceptions. That's why we see guys getting stuff. I get it. The ball might not be thrown to you. But when you're playing safety and you have the ability to have range and do other things, you don't necessarily have to be, quote unquote, going off the system. If you're elite, you could be playing your system and be able to still react and be around the ball and get interceptions. But I would rather, the question I was going to bring up later was who's some guys that you would want. But I want to get to the quarterback real quick before we get to those kind of questions. Quarterbacks. Did this shock you at all? Or was it like one of those ones where, like, it's the 49ers, nothing surprises me, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan don't surprise me again?
Listen, it shocked me. Like, it shouldn't have, because this is what the 49ers do. And it's funny because my initial reaction was I wasn't upset at all. Like, I think that if I had told myself a week ago this was going to happen, that I would have been upset. But I wasn't upset really at all when it happened. I really saw why they would do something like that. There's a lot of positives that came from it. But as I sat on it, I didn't get like upset with it, but I sent out a tweet, and this is kind of what my ultimate thought was. The 49ers have routinely messed up the quarterback position. They just have. From 2017 all the way through, 2018, they didn't really have a choice, but 2017, they decided not to scout really Mahomes or Watson, right? And I understand that a lot of people passed on Mahomes. Watson, the whole thing is 2020, hindsight's 2020. But they self-admittedly didn't even do their due diligence there because they had a plan in place, and that plan was Kirk Cousins. Well, they bail on that plan to go get Jimmy Garoppolo, a player that, was fine, but he certainly wasn't Kirk Cousins in Kyle Shanahan's eyes. I mean, he said he was depressed for a couple days after they made that move. So they bail on their own plan, that plan that cost them even looking at Mahomes or Watson. Then in 2019, after the Super Bowl, they have a chance to go get one Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback that has ever graced the football field. They decide not to do that because they decide to keep Jimmy Garoppolo. Then a year later, they finally replace Jimmy Garoppolo and go trade everything to get Trey Lance. And then they sit Trey Lance. So now Trey Lance is going to be going through growing pains this year that he could have gotten out of his system last year. So why on earth did I ever think that the 49ers would do the number one best thing that they could do in getting Jimmy off this roster? Why did I ever live under that assumption? I should have known that they were going to mess it up because they always mess it up at this position. They just do.
That's the funniest thing, right? Because this whole time, everyone's thought Jimmy Garoppolo was off the roster. Like, even the 49ers thought he was gone, right? So seeing them bring him back at this price range, it doesn't make me mad. It doesn't piss me off because I do believe he is a better backup than Nate Sudfeld and Brock Purdy. That is 100% sure. Like, it's kind of hard to argue that you can't. It's hard to argue that he's not better than both of those. Like, he really is. And shout out to Rohan in the chat. He said, "Hold on, you're bringing this guy on my channel? Oh, hell no." And then he said, "For you to grow a beard."
Uh-huh. I'm trying.
And then he said, I'm proud. He's proud that you didn't crack up. But going back to the conversation about Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo, what surprised me the most is you literally outcasted this dude for a few weeks, for months, like the entire training camp. You outcasted him. He's not around the team during meetings. He doesn't have a playbook. He doesn't have this, doesn't have that. And then you're like, well, hey, Jimmy, you want to come back? I mean, it makes sense for both of us. We need a backup quarterback because our two backup quarterbacks suck. And we could restructure and give you a little more guaranteed, or you could get cut and probably not get that much in guaranteed. What do you say, huh? And he took the bait. I think he's, in my opinion, I think that was dumb of him. I think he could have got the same on the open market. And I think he could have started for a team on the open market. Now, the biggest question is this Trey Lance's team or is this Jimmy Garoppolo's team? Who wears the captain patch throughout the season? Because we know Jimmy's worn that the past couple years. Does Trey Lance finally get that patch, or do they keep giving it to Jimmy, a backup quarterback?
I don't think they'll give either one a captain patch, to be real. I don't think it's going to go to the quarterback position. I think it's something that Trey's going to have to earn. I can't imagine them giving it to Jimmy. I mean that right there would be like the ultimate listen to what we say, not what we do moment. Like you cannot give that man a captain's patch. So I would expect that neither one of them get it, to be real. You know, I want to take Shanahan at face value, and this is one thing I'll give him credit for. Whatever he does say usually happens. Okay? Usually. He's very honest about the situation, and he said that this is Trey's team, right? And so I don't want to act like this is a big deal for Trey Lance. I think Trey Lance will be able to work through this. He was obviously consulted. He agreed to it. Although I don't know if he really had a choice other than to say, sure, that's what you want to do. Like, let's be real about the situation. But I do think that you're leaving the door open for a potential problem. I do. I mean, there's just no way around it. You know, I see the positives in it, and I saw those early on. But to act as if there is just no negative impact that can come from this, that these aren't human beings, it's funny, right? Because a lot of people want to talk about the human element when it comes to football, and I love that we discuss that because sports are played by human beings, and there is a human element to all of this. But all of a sudden, they want to act like there is no human element when it comes to picking sides with these two quarterbacks and act as if there is no way possible that this could ever turn into an issue. And if it does turn into an issue, Marco, it's Trey Lance's fault because he should have played better. The door shouldn't even be open because you would never say those things if Brock Purdy or Sudfeld was the backup. You're only going to say those things if Jimmy Garoppolo is the backup, which I find very, very interesting because we know that even if Jimmy Garoppolo, let's just assume that he's the better quarterback now, right? Like, let's live under that assumption. He's still not good enough to win the Super Bowl. So if you are doing anything other than going all in on Trey Lance, that's not Trey Lance's problem. That's a Kyle Shanahan problem. Kyle Shanahan's the one that chose to bring in Trey Lance. If Trey Lance doesn't succeed, that's on Kyle Shanahan. That's not on Trey Lance. It's a Shanahan problem. Let's be clear about that.
Jesse, you know what they said when the 49ers traded up to number 3 and drafted Trey Lance? How can you do this to Jimmy Garoppolo? Do you not understand what kind of pressure this puts on Jimmy Garoppolo to take the team to a Super Bowl and to win his job and keep his NFL playing career? Now they're saying that we can't say that about Trey Lance, but they were saying this about Jimmy Garoppolo, that how is it fair to put pressure on him with the number 3 overall quarterback for him to continue his career if he plays bad is because they drafted a quarterback number 3 and the pressure is on him. But then now they're saying you can't say that about Trey Lance. Absolutely ridiculous. I think this is 100% Trey Lance's team. I hope they give Trey Lance that captain patch. Absolutely hope he gets that captain patch. Because one, he's actually a leader. Jimmy Garoppolo is not. I mean, we've heard other players from other respective teams say he is a, you guys know what word I'm going to say, but I'm not going to say it because there's kids listening. We heard players say that about Jimmy Garoppolo. Yet, we're sitting here acting like Jimmy Garoppolo is a hell of a player, a hell of a teammate. A hell of a teammate actually texts his teammates back. He actually calls his teammates, actually does stuff for his teammates, and doesn't bail out on the team when he gets paid as the highest paid NFL quarterback after that 5-game stretch. He would have led his team by example and done other stuff for them. Instead, he took the route where I want to be with porn stars, I want to be making that money kind of approach. So, last question before we get you out of here, because I appreciate you for being here all the time you've taken out of your day. Is there any players out there the 49ers should go and sign that have been cut or waived by other teams?
Yeah, to me, again, the biggest one is going to be Harris. I'm bringing in Alex Leatherwood for a workout, though. I have to. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know if he can play in this league at a high level. I don't even know if he can be a backup. But listen, the Raiders organization is a dumpster fire. They took him way too high, and we all said that when they made that pick. However, he was probably a second round grade, right? Late first round, probably second, probably mid second round grade. They have to look at that. Like, they are in a position right now where I don't think they have any offensive linemen other than the starters that have to make this team. At least go kick the tires on him. Like, figure it out, because he played guard, but he was mocked out as a tackle coming out when he was drafted. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I think he's only been in the league for a year.
2 years,
Like, there has to be. He what?
2 years.
Okay, 2 years.
So his first year, they used that tackle, played so bad, they moved him inside, got benched, and then his second year was at right guard or right tackle, moved inside, and then was completely at right guard for the rest of the year.
Maybe you can find that same magic that you just had with Laken Tomlinson, right? A guy that was completely written off in Detroit, which was a dumpster fire of a franchise. I mean, maybe Leatherwood can be that lost player that you can go and mold and turn into something. Like, I would at least kick the tires on bringing him in, meeting with him, and seeing if there's anything there. I think it's at least worth a look. I really do.
So there's a couple players I would actually give looks to. Austin Reeder, center. I would give him a call, see if he wants to come to the practice squad, potentially even the roster. I mean, he has the game experience that you need, and the 49ers have no centers on their roster with any game experience. Jake Brendel is not a center that has played much in the NFL. I would also definitely 100% do whatever I have to do and probably make Alec Lindstrom the highest paid practice squad player on my practice squad. I would try to develop him into a center. I want people to do me a favor. Go to Twitter, type in Alex Lindstrom in the search bar. Go watch some videos of him when he was with the Cowboys. I watch a lot of Cowboys games because my buddy, and I'll continue to watch Cowboys games because one of my good friends from middle school is Darren Bland, who was a cornerback for the Dallas Cowboys, and Alec Lindstrom was mauling dudes. I don't care about his size. That was a big question mark and reason why he went undrafted when he was actually a pretty good center in college. That is a player I would go sign, as well as Anthony Harris. So the three guys I would go out and try to either sign or bring to your practice squad. And more so practice squad, because you're not going to cut players on your team for these guys. Like, it just doesn't make sense to do so. So it would more so be practice squad guys that you pay heavily, because you could pay them a little bit more than the minimum on the practice squad. Anything else, Jesse, you have about the 53-man roster before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, I'll just say this. Like, I know we put a lot of stock into preseason numbers and stats and things that come out of training camp. I mean, it's the only football that we have. I do find it interesting, and this doesn't just happen with the 49ers. I mean, Minnesota cut their defensive tackle today that had like 5 preseason sacks. Like, he was the darling of the preseason. A lot of times you see people show out in the preseason or other people struggle and you assume you have it all figured out. These coaches and these teams do not put a lot of stock in the preseason. They just don't. Like, it. We find that out every single year. And even the players to a certain extent. I mean, it's just not a barometer of how the season's going to go at all. Jamar Chase couldn't catch a football without white stripes on it last year. We saw how his season went. Like, it's just the regular season is a whole different animal. I'm excited for the regular season. I cannot wait for week 1 to see what Shanahan runs out there and what this team looks like. And, we put way too much stock in it as fans, and I get it. I understand it. But, like, when we think we have it all figured out, the way this roster construction is, we don't have anything figured out. Like, I'll just say that right now.
I absolutely agree with you, Jesse. I appreciate you for taking your time out of your day to come join me right after you just recorded. If you guys don't follow Jesse on Twitter, make sure you guys do so. Jesse, do you want to tap in your handle? I'll also have that in the description. He also has Last Second Sports on YouTube. Make sure you guys subscribe to that. But go ahead and plug your channel. Tell us a little bit about what you do in terms of the content you provide and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me on Twitter at jnay_LSS. And yeah, YouTube, Last Second Sports. Again, I cover the 49ers side clearly, but it is a mixed channel. I've got my partner over there that covers the Lions. So we have a lot of fun, a lot of cross fandom. And it's kind of cool, right? Because we have two completely different fan bases that kind of come together over there. One in the 49ers, where we really expect to win a Super Bowl every year. And then one in the Lions that are just hoping that they can win 8 games this year, right? And so it's kind of funny because they're on the come up and we're trying to win a Super Bowl. So it's an interesting contrast, but it works really, really well. Like there's no rivalry over there. It's just a lot of fun. So tap in over at Last Second Sports for sure.
It definitely sounds like a family at Last Second Sports. So make sure you guys tap in. I appreciate you, Jesse, for coming on. That's it for today's episode. Thank you all for tuning in. And don't forget to like and subscribe. We out.